Thank you. So welcome everyone. We are really glad to be here. For those of you that still don't know me, I am Dr. Laila Sandroni, and I am a STEP Fellow with the IAI, participating in the organizing team of this amazing course, and also being a facilitator for these amazing groups. So welcome to our last week. It's incredible. Time just flew by. I don't know if you all feel the same, but it's amazing. But we are reaching to our last week of our online course. But we still have two really great sessions this week to close with a golden key. I don't know if this expression makes sense in English, but in Portuguese it does. Just some housekeeping. As you all know, we have interpretation from English to Spanish and from Spanish to English. You all know about this at this point. And this week is week 7, and we are going to address in this session transdisciplinary grant writing, assessment, and evaluation. We'll have the opportunity to hear from our transdisciplinary consulting team about grant writing processes. So I think this will be a really important session to all, because all the amazing concepts and theoretical frames and on-the-ground examples that were explored throughout the previous TD sessions will be grounded also today in how to make a proposition like those that you have heard about throughout all the process of the course can be built in a successful way. So this is a really important toolkit session for the ones that are willing and able to move forward to the in-person workshop. So before we begin and I pass on the floor to our amazing speakers, I'd just like to share with you some processes about the course itself and the evaluation, since we are now reaching our last week. So the criteria for the evaluation of the concept notes each team should deliver as the main product of the course was shared with you. So the idea was to be as transparent as possible on how your projects and your conceptual notes will be reviewed by the organizing team. So each of the concept notes that you deliver at the end of this course will be evaluated by at least 2 of us, and we will all follow the same set of criteria that's now also shared with you. So you should read this document carefully and try to address the questions that are implemented there. So, and if you have any questions about how this evaluation will occur, and if you don't understand any parts of the concept note, please reach out to your facilitators. So the Spanish version is also available at the bottom of the document. So it's a bilingual document, so everyone can have direct access to it. And this is the rubric that will be used to evaluate your concept notes in the end. So to move forward and to have your concept note evaluated, as we already, someone has their microphone on, and I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. As part of the process of evaluation and to have your concept notes evaluated by the organizing team, as we said previously, at least two members of each team should have passed the course to get a certificate for the course. And for that, you have to fulfill 2 requirements. One would be the attendance for the course, and the second would be the final exam. It will be a multiple choice and true false format test that you will take online. And the exam will remain open until 11:59, until the end of the day, Eastern time, on Thursday, November 10th. So you will have about 1 week to fulfill the text, to fulfill the test, and be able to get the certificate. And the percentage for attendance is plus 70% of live Zoom sessions and the final exam. The certificate of participation will be sent out to all eligible participants via the email. So regardless of seeking to move forward to phase 2, everyone, including individual participants that have more than 70% of attendance and take the test, will receive the certificate for the online course. So please, again, check regularly that your microphones are muted and the attendance is being verified throughout the whole course. And we still kindly ask that your cameras remain on if you can during the session, because it really makes a difference for our speakers. And due to time constraints, only some questions will be answered during the session, and the rest will be answered via email. And as usual, this is a 90-minute session that will begin with our case study that will be provided by Dr. Nicole Arbor, and followed by the TD team lecture on grant writing. So these are our fabulous speakers for today. Dr. Lily House-Peters, Dr. Gabriela Alonso-Yanes, Marsha Lee Valentine, and Nicole Arbor. And I'm going to present Dr. Nicole. So Nicole Arbor is with the Belmont Forum. She has held several roles in Canada, including Senior Advisor, International Relations at the National Research Council of Canada, team lead for the UK Science and Innovation Network in Canada, and she has worked as a research and scientist in the Canadian biotech sector. Nicole is passionate about science communications, science policy, evidence-informed decision-making, and science diplomacy. And if that wouldn't be enough, she also holds a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Ottawa. And also from a personal side, from working with Nicole, I just recommend everyone to keep their eyes and ears really open to the following lecture, because Nicole is an amazing person in terms of recognizing the possibilities for transdisciplinary research and building networks throughout the Americas and beyond to promote these types of approaches in research and practice. So welcome, Nicole. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lila, and thank you, everybody. So I apologize in advance. Mi español es poquito, so I'm going to speak in English, but luckily there's interpretation. I'm also going to ask Lila if she could kindly let me know if I'm speaking too fast at any point, either in the chat or in some other way, because I have a tendency of speaking very rapidly. And so I'm going to try and keep this at a reasonable pace, both for the interpreters and for anyone who's also listening in English. So thank you for inviting me to present. I'm just going to share my screen to get us going. She says, going exactly to the wrong screen to do that. There we go. And once I share that, I will put it on presentation mode. There we go. All right, so can you see a presentation? I'm looking at Lila for a thumbs up. Yes, perfect. All right, so basically, thank you for inviting me to present to this course. There's some wonderful work here, and I hope to have an opportunity to explore with Lila and the rest of the team at some point how effective this was, because it's a great group, and I'm really excited to be able to use the Belmont Forum as a case study for grant writing, because the more opportunities I have to talk about the Belmont Forum as an opportunity for funding, especially in the transdisciplinary space, hopefully that means the more really strong applications that we will get to have more research in that transdisciplinary international context, which is not always, you can always have more, right? You can always have more. So just to give you a bit of background in the Belmont Forum for anyone who is not familiar with it, the Belmont Forum basically is an organization that evolved out of necessity. So for those of you who work in any national space, you will recognize that money doesn't cross borders very easily. And so to create international projects can be very challenging. And so the Belmont Forum basically has evolved as a mechanism to bring research funders together from different parts of the planet, but who also are in this context working within their own policy structures. So instead of having a common pool of money, what we do is we have different partners, funding partners, who come in and who can fund very specific portions of the funding. And so the challenge, of course, is to bring all of these partners together around shared projects. And so the way that we do that is we support the Belmont Forum Challenge, which is to support international transdisciplinary research to mitigate and adapt to global environmental change. And within this context, this larger Belmont Forum framework, we're looking for transdisciplinary approaches that enable us to bring together non-scientific stakeholder communities with researchers to facilitate in a systemic way the research projects that are addressing these challenges. We want there to be collaboration also within that context across scientific disciplines, but really it's about providing flexible mechanisms to support transnational funding in projects or in the space where global environmental change transcends all of our geopolitical borders. These are challenges that we're all facing in different parts of the world in different ways, but also in similar ways. So how can we all work together to build towards shared solutions in spaces that where we're going to need more than one country to be thinking about some of these problems. So the way the Belmont Forum does is it creates what we call collaborative research action. So that's basically, essentially, it's a call for proposals. They're guided through the Belmont Challenge, but really they bring together the different funders into one call. And the call comes together. I'm just gonna, so the calls are, the priority of the calls is developed by our members. The Belmont Forum structure, which I have here, we have members, we have partners. There's probably more detail here than you need, but the members are the ones who decide the direction of travel. They're the ones who say, okay, well, the priorities that we're seeing at this point are, for example, climate, environment, and health, which we are currently building the collaborative research action on and is very relevant to this group. And then that call is, as long as it's agreed to by 3 members, that this is something that they all agree is worth funding, it will come to the table. We will have a global exercise that helps us to define that problem so that all of the potential participants can see themselves reflected in that call text. So really identifying the problem case very broadly and globally. And then it will come to be a call for proposals through the Belmont Forum process. And the challenge, of course, of creating this, when it comes to creating a proposal for one of these calls, especially in the context of the Belmont Forum, it's really at that bottom level you're seeing on my slide where we have a consortium in a big circle. It's putting those puzzle pieces together. It's identifying the partners that are eligible for funding, and it's thinking about how do you write that proposal in a way that really brings to the surface the excellence of the research and the transdisciplinarity of the team. So that it is going to, I'm sorry, there's a noise behind me and I'm not sure how much it's affecting what you're hearing. Yeah, so that you're creating a consortium that not only meets the needs of the call that is being put out, but that also also is eligible for the funding that has been put together, has been assembled. Belmont Forum, also the way that we've built the system, has a few requirements that all of the members have agreed to in order to create research projects that come together in this global environmental change space. Because we want truly international projects, we look for collaborators from at least 3 different countries who are requesting funds from at least 3 different agencies. Honestly, most of the time, there's more countries than just the 3 that are put into each project. Oftentimes, we're able to get very large consortiums, including multiple, more than 3 countries. We're looking for transdisciplinary projects to be promoted. And so these transdisciplinary projects, we want, when we're defining this to make it as easy as possible for our community, we're looking for natural scientists, we're looking for social scientists, and we're looking for stakeholders to be part of the consortium that is being proposed. And that means at the very beginning, what we're looking for, and when we say stakeholders, we define that very broadly. It can be policymakers, it can be community members, it can be not-for-profit organizations, it can be industry, but the idea is to create societally relevant research with meaningful co-production so that the stakeholders are involved at the beginning, at the defining of the problem case itself, so that that it's really societally relevant. It's been there's been identification by the community itself that this is a challenge that they wish to engage with. They are taken through the process. So it's not just the researchers who are doing all of the research. The society is part of the stakeholders are part of the research itself, and they're getting benefit at the end. So you're really getting that co-production, participatory approaches, co-development, and co-implementation. So optimally, in a perfect world, that transdisciplinarity goes all the way through the process. Now, we recognize that we don't live in a perfect world, and that transdisciplinarity is something that we're working to teach and to integrate into the thought process of the research community more and more. But it's an iterative process. So that's the ultimate goal, is to have that co-production from the beginning to the end. Some of the projects we have are amazing and wonderful and have all of these pieces. And more we're seeing the development of this research community. And part of that is to provide these opportunities to help people find ways to bring these kinds of projects together. And it's discussions like these that make this possible. And within the context of a Belmont Forum call, while you have to have sort of the 3 countries with at least 3 different requesting funding from at least 3 different funders. If there are researchers who are not, who don't have eligible funding available to them, they can still participate, but they have to participate either by bringing their own funding, so aligning an existing research project perhaps is one way of doing that, or by providing in-kind contributions. So what do you need to think about when you're building your Belmont Forum project consortium? So as we mentioned, or as I mentioned, we do require 3 different funders. So when you're looking at a funding call, and I'll go through a very specific example afterwards, I'm totally going to pick on the IAI in this one, but they should have expected that in a good way. You need to identify, you need to look at the list of the funders that are presented in a call. And so with each Belmont Forum call, we have a list of funders. And each of those funders has a document that we call an annex. And in that annex, it details, and I'll go through one of those with you, it details what the rules of engagement are for that particular funder. In what you're looking for is a system where you have 3 different funders. Here you have them listed as Funder A, Funder B, and Funder C. And where the consortium leads and the different partners are from different countries. In some annexes, but not all, in some annexes, the funder requires the consortium lead to be from their country. I have seen that happen in the past. So it's worth really looking at all of the details and taking the time to pull apart an annex to really understand what each funder requires. And so in that context, it's important not to, which is very easy. It's easy to slip into this trap, to look at the funder list and be like, oh, okay, this country, and this country are supported. So I'm just going to go out and I'm going to find my friends who are from those individual countries. We're going to come together. We're going to build a project. That doesn't always work. because sometimes the devil is in the details. And you really need to understand that this particular research funder can maybe only fund natural scientists, or maybe they can only fund social scientists, or maybe, although I have yet to see this specifically, maybe they could only fund stakeholders. I want more of those, but I don't have that many of them yet. So really going through and understanding what that looks like. Same thing with funding requirements. Some of them require the institution that receives the funding to be, I know the word they use in the UK is a higher education institution, but some other funders can fund anyone. So as long as you're a recognized institution, legal entity, they can fund a not-for-profit, they could fund different types of partners. So understanding who can receive that funding is also really important. So really taking the time to make sure that you have these three funders in place, or these three pieces in place, is really, really important, and understanding what each of the funders are looking for to enable that funding. And then of course you have to look at the Belmont Forum requirements. You have to identify, do I have partners that are natural scientists? Do I have partners that are social scientists? And do I have partners that are identified as stakeholders? And that's a broader base, but it's actually often harder for the academic community to identify those stakeholder partners. Now, in this conversation, I'm pretty sure you have a little bit more understanding of what that looks like than perhaps some of the other communities that I've spoken to in the past. So see, these are some of the pieces of what you look for in an annex. What countries are supported, who is eligible, so what type of participant can receive funding from each annex. Sometimes our funders contribute in kind and not direct funding. So in the context of IAI, for example, for the Pathways to Sustainability call that happened, I think it was in 2020, they didn't have funding, but they had in-kind contributions. And so researchers who identified IAI as their partner or as their funding source, they counted as one of the partners, but they didn't receive direct funding. They're eligible to receive support in other ways from IAI. And sometimes that is through creating linkages, so through different types of activities that the IAI supports. There's often also a funding cap. If you request too far above the funding cap, your project becomes ineligible, because the researcher, the community will look at the call and will say, oh, well, we're only putting in, for example, perhaps $50,000. You've requested $500,000. If it's a decimal place that you've accidentally misplaced, it's not a problem. But if you are requesting $500,000 but only eligible for 50, you probably won't be able to do the research that you said you're going to do in your project. And so really understanding what that maximum is super important. What is the duration? Where to submit the proposal? So we have one grant operating system. Everything has to go through that. But sometimes some funders also request that it be submitted in parallel so that they have it in their system as well. So for example, FAPESP is one of our partners who request that the grant is submitted through BFCO, but it is also submitted through the FAPESP system. And then of course, there's sometimes the stipulations, stipulations for the number of researchers in the consortium. Remembering the currency is important. So each annex is not written in US dollars or euros, or any other specific currency. So making sure that you're paying attention to currency conversions. And of course, the GPC point of contact. There's always someone who is identified in each annex as the person to ask questions. And I would encourage anyone who is trying to develop a grant proposal to use those people to your advantage. They're there to answer your questions. If anything is unclear at any point in time, send emails. It's really important to be flexible, or to be willing to reach out. So now I'm going to pull apart a very specific annex. Like I said, I'm picking on the IAI because it makes sense in this context. The IAI was part of a recent call on migration. So they submitted an annex, and this is, I've pulled apart the key points, the things that I think are really important for you to look at when you're looking for an annex. So for example, in this particular call, which was for human migration, the IAI supported Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, except Sao Paulo, and that was only because FAPESP was also part of the call, so those researchers had available funding. Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica. Anyways, there's quite a list here of eligible countries who could have come together. But the thing to remember that IAI is one funder. They're not multiple funders. So even if you put three countries together from that list, this is still only part of the eligibility criteria necessary to come together to participate in a Belmont Forum call. You still would have needed to find 2 other funders in this context who would be able to support that call. In this case, they were providing 3 years of funding or in-kind support, and normally it's actually and or with the IAI. And one eligible country could apply for up to $50,000 US. With 2, you could have 100, or with 3 or more, up to 150. So each of the projects could have asked for a total of $150,000 US per project. So that requested funding. They could also request in-kind support instead of funding. And they wanted the teams, the preference would be for teams who were led by individuals who are members of groups that have been historically underrepresented. So that the idea there is to support those research communities that often don't have that opportunity. So and IAI funded researchers could be either listed as the lead researcher or as a co-PI or partner on the proposal. And researchers could be a senior personnel on up to 2 proposals. So there could be up to 2 projects that would have had the same researchers submitted at the same time. Oh, sorry. One of the things that IAI requested in their annex that was different than the others is that they also required teams to include an equity, diversity, and inclusion plan within their proposal. So this isn't, this is one of those things that I'm hoping that we will make more common within the context of the Belmont Forum, but that's not uniformly required by all funders. And so this is actually something I'm getting to and moving towards with my membership community. But in the context of the IAI grant proposal or the annex, it is a requirement. So if this is something that you have to see. If you don't look through the annex and notice that there has to be an EDI plan, if you don't have your EDI plan present, then your project can be deemed ineligible. So that's an important thing to consider. IAI also had a line item that said that all applications should align with IAI's policies, strategic plan, and scientific agenda, and that they made it easy. They added in all of those links. But again, it's taking the time to go through all of the documents. So this isn't, working in an international setting is never easy. We try to make it as easy as possible, but the context is still challenging when you're trying to bring together different agencies who have different requirements and different pieces as part of that. So if you take that one step deeper, and I'm not going to go too deep because I know we have lots of time and you can ask all sorts of detailed questions after if you like. But here's just a couple of line items that, if you were looking at this and you're like, okay, well, how do I think about drafting my grant application? Okay, well, I have to have all of these things in. Oh, now I have to look at the policies. I have to put an EDI plan together. Where do I find the EDI policy? You look at the EDI policy in this context. What is IAI trying to achieve with this EDI policy? I'm pretty sure Lila is very familiar with some of the wording that she's seeing on the screen right now, but that's really looking at, mainstreaming IAI science projects to include EDI as all part of them. So facilitating full and equitable participation of underrepresented groups, supporting regional efforts, and improving capacity of government. So there's lots of wonderful stuff in here. And that basically covers, it's a bit of a deep dive into one annex, but you have to keep in mind that for a research proposal, a project to go into the Belmont Forum, you need to look at all of the relevant annexes. You need to understand what the rules of engagement are for each of those at least three funders that you're looking to receive funding for. Because the easiest way to have a project disqualified from the system is that it doesn't actually meet the eligibility requirements of the funders from whom it is seeking funding. So that makes it very challenging. But within that context, so if you follow those rules of engagement, if you take the time to really understand who the eligible partners are, and like I said, if there's at any point, if there's confusion, you go straight to that contact point. Each of the funders has a contact point. It's part of the process. They have to identify someone whose role it is to identify and engage with any questions that come from that community. And normally those people are able to support those communities in the language of that community, so that the Belmont Forum language of operation is in English. We try to be more flexible where possible, but and I'm working on my Spanish, but it's not there yet. But the different funding institutions definitely are able to engage with their community. Within the Belmont Forum process, though, that once you've got through the annexes, once you've decided, if you pull together your team of researchers and stakeholders that meet that definition of social scientists, natural scientists, and stakeholders that come from 3 different countries that are eligible for funding through the annexes, then it's the review process. And so really, in this context, for the Belmont Forum, our panel of experts is nominated by all participating funders. And so when we bring those funders together to join the call, we ask them all to nominate experts, normally within their community, but many of them have international partners. Lila, I'm looking at your face and wondering, is the sound clear, or is the wind making this difficult?
It was sounding quite clear. Just right now, it got a little bit less
Okay.
clear to hear.
Okay, I think it's better now, but if it just let me know. I might end up putting my hood, it'll cover the headphones. I'll look a little funnier though, in which case I apologize in advance. So the panel of experts is nominated by all the different participating funders. So they'll reach out to they won't necessarily reach out, but they'll nominate experts from their community to come together into one shared reviewed process, which is also a very valuable part of the Belmont Forum process, because it means that you're not going through 5 different review processes or 3 different review processes. You're able to do this in one single point, so you don't have that double jeopardy where you're applying to one country, they say yes, but then the other researcher in your party is applying to another country and they say no. In this case, it all comes together, and when a project comes through the review process successfully, it's funded by all the partners that the funding was submitted to. So there's one single review panel. And in this context, the review is based on, for the Belmont Forum, sort of 3 main pieces. There's the quality and intellectual merit. There is the fit to call objectives, because obviously the call has a defined call text. And then there's sort of the personnel quality and the quality of transdisciplinarity. What I didn't put in here is there's also an open, there's considerations in the review descriptions. There's also considerations for things like open data and fair data. There has to be a data plan, data and digital objects management plan submitted as part of the Belmont Forum call. So this is also a very important consideration that I probably should have added on this slide, and we'll add for the future slides, for future use of this slide. So these are all, but these are the things that we're looking for, and that we're asking our reviewers to really pull apart when they're reviewing each project. And so once it comes through this review process, that's when the successful projects get their funding. So, why would you work through the Belmont Forum as a funder? So why do all my funders come together to hang out with us? It's not only because we're really fun, and we are, but it's because it's a trusted collaborative process that has been going on for 12 years. We've had over 150 different members and funders come through this process, which says a lot about the process, actually. It's been refined over the years. But overall, despite the challenges associated with bringing together many international partners, it's been successful. We've done 19 of these collaborative research actions, like the ones that have been described, and it is a single point of entry, which makes it a lot easier when you're trying to build international projects. Once agreed upon, one agreed upon transdisciplinary process, but we also build community through this process. So not only are there activities like this, but when our collaborative research actions, each one as they come together, as the projects are awarded, You have kickoff meetings, midterm meetings, and enter meetings that are all mandated by the Belmont Forum process. So that brings together all the individual projects within a collaborative research action to share to share understanding, to share best practice, and to learn from one another, and hopefully to create other opportunities to collaborate. And so that's 3 different times throughout the course of that funding process that these groups are mandated to come together. In the pre-COVID world, this was always done in person. Obviously, in a COVID world, that was done all virtually, and I suspect that in a post-COVID, or as close as we are to that now, that will probably remain hybrid for the next little while. But it's a great opportunity to build that community, to share with one another, and to create networks in the transdisciplinary space. And then the Belmont Forum is also involved in convening the broader transdisciplinary community in collaboration with Future Earth at the annual Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress, which we host every year. This year it's going to be in Panama in collaboration with II and Senesit. And this is another opportunity for us to bring together the overall thematics, a very broad group of people, of practitioners in the transdisciplinary space, to bring together some of the stakeholders who have been successfully part of these projects. So the Belmont Forum is about funding really wonderful and groundbreaking research, but it's also about creating community and really supporting and developing that societally relevant research base. So creating those links between science and society, some of the things that I really love. It's great to work in a research organization that does all of the things you love. So I'm obviously going to stay and answer all of the questions, but if you wanted to follow any research calls that are coming up, we have lots of ways that you can, get information from us. I will also, my email is at the bottom there if you want to email me directly. By all means, if you email me in Spanish, I will run it through DeepL and I will reply to you in Spanish, but I make no promises that the translations are going to be good. So you'll just have to be patient with me. And then, of course, we welcome you all to join us at SRI in Panama. The call for contributions is now open, and we'd love to see as much of the Americas community as possible join us. We're going to be in the Americas, and it's time to celebrate all of the wonderful research that happens here. And so with that, I will end my presentation and hand the baton over to whoever is next and be available for questions. I think you said, Lila, that you're going to do questions after both presentations. Is that right?
Yes. So we have 15 minutes at the end of the session to have questions that should be addressed to both you and to Lily and Gabriela that are also here, because since the 2 presentations are really interconnected, it's possible that some questions are going to be to the 3 of you or 2 of you. So it's a better way of to make the most of our time here. And also I remember the participants that we probably won't have time to answer all the questions live. So we are going to pick and choose some questions that are more expressive or broader, and then we can have answers for the specific ones that we can send the answers to your mailboxes as we did in previous sessions. So thank you so much, Nicole. I think that the example of the Belmont Forum is a really great opportunity. I can understand that some people get a little bit scared about the immense amount of acronyms that are used and the ways
I'm so sorry. I forgot about the acronyms. I normally try to be more sensitive to that. And then I just looked at the chat and I realized I really did a bad job of de-acronyming. I apologize.
but that's also part of the game, starting to learn the different acronyms and how they follow. So this is an important part of the job of grant writing, is understanding the call really well. And to understand that, you have to understand the funder as well. So I think your presentation brings lots of insights that someone just poking around the Belmont Forum, the Belmont Forum site, could not have this clear picture that you have provided us. So thank you so much. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Dr. Lily House-Peters and Dr. Gabriela Alonso. If you can please, hello. Welcome. I'll just pass on the floor to you, and then we'll have some time for questions in the end.
Good morning, Lily House-Peters. I believe Gabriela is here as well, and we will be presenting the final session of the transdisciplinary kind of background, thinking about the concept note. So for the sake of time, what we would really like to focus on, or one element, is the piece of the concept note, which also Nicole Arbor's presentation focused on, which is thinking about and being sure to integrate clearly into the transdisciplinary research element and the concept note, how the project will utilize equitable, diverse, and inclusive research strategies. And so here we just want to spend a few minutes talking about and introducing IAI's equity, diversity, and inclusivity strategy. And we have here, and we can share the direct links, but the English and Spanish versions of this policy. And so the IAI Science Agenda calls for the engagement of diverse stakeholders through transdisciplinary science at all stages of knowledge production. And this is from the research funding, through the design, through the implementation, and the dissemination and communication of your results. And so this is a really important piece of the concept note that you're currently working with your teams to develop, is thinking about, from the beginning stages of your research through community engagement, through the knowledge mobilization and dissemination pieces, how you will ensure that the research is equitable, that it's inclusive of diverse identities, diverse groups of people, both in terms of your research team composition, but also community engagement, and then how the results are shared. And we know from many reports that exist, many articles, that historic and persistent inequalities and underrepresentation of specific groups continues to be a persistent problem in knowledge production and knowledge circulation in the Americas. And so we want to be careful to not continue to reproduce this problem, but instead to move beyond it with this work. So for the sake of time, we also want to draw attention to where, I think there's a microphone there, draw attention to, in addition to the IAI, this movement globally towards a more open science. And so here you see from UNESCO in 2021, their Open Science Declaration. And this acknowledges or recognizes that open science should not only foster enhanced sharing of scientific knowledge among just the scientific community, but also really promote inclusion and exchange of scholarly knowledge from traditionally underrepresented or excluded groups, so including women, so thinking about gender here, minorities, indigenous scholars, scholars from less advantaged countries, and low resource languages, and contribute to reducing inequalities and access to scientific development, infrastructure, and capabilities among different countries and regions. So following the IAI's EDI policy and kind of UNESCO's open science, we wanted to just share a little bit about the three pillars: equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this language is taken from the IAI's policy and the overarching kind of concept of intersectionality. And make sure that as you're thinking with your projects and developing your projects, you're considering where each of these elements or pillars can be included. And then being sure that that aspect of your concept note is strong and clear and well developed. So intersectionality, kind of the umbrella concept here, and this frame refers to what is really a systemic or structural marginalization and disadvantage at the intersection of multiple different identities. And so here we're thinking about where, for example, gender might intersect with other identities such as age, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, religion, disability, language, etc., and how this intersection can cause some groups to have kind of more power and be overrepresented, especially in science and in research. This includes in research leadership. So not only the composition of your team overall, but who are the PIs and co-PIs? What is the gender balance there? What is the different kind of intersection of identities across kind of your research team? And then also in terms of the communities that you're engaging, the communities that your research is focused on, and how knowledge is going to be mobilized or communicated to diverse groups so that there is kind of an equity focus in who benefits from the research. Equity itself refers to removing these systemic barriers and biases. So thinking about how all individuals can have equal opportunity to access and benefit from the research. Diversity in green represents the differences in age, sex, sexual orientation, ability, gender, et cetera, et cetera. So really thinking about how to take advantage of composing a diverse team, or a team that includes diverse identities, and then also that the research is engaging diverse communities. And finally, inclusion in pink, that pillar is the practice of ensuring that all individuals are valued and respected for their contributions and are receiving support and are integrated into all phases of the scientific process. So this is kind of to think about how these different pillars will be represented and built into your work. Okay. And briefly here, just to summarize the IAI's policy, the focus here is to really mainstream equity, diversity, and inclusion in research. And here an example is thinking about your gender balance in your team composition, as well as your research leadership, as just one small example of how this could play out. Also, being sure to really facilitate full and equitable participation of underrepresented groups in science, and supporting regional efforts to develop high quality science and improve the capacity as well of policy and government relevant to global environmental change. And so as you are writing your concept notes, please be aware of the IAI's EDI plan and take into consideration clearly how you will address EDI in your research. Okay, and we're happy to answer additional questions about that as well. And finally here, just a few best practices that we've found in our research experience and in the literature for integrating EDI in research. And really it's beginning with this as an intentional focus. So being sure that research teams are purposefully and deliberately diverse, that this isn't an accident, but that it's actually planned from the beginning how these elements will be included. Thinking as well at times about demographic diversity. So there we have all of the different kind of identity categories, but also thinking about cognitive diversity. And we found in transdisciplinary teamwork that having differences in thought and insights and perspectives and conceptual frameworks is also really important piece of this diversity and can really help teams to think in new ways about problems by having, you know, a diverse kind of group of thinkers. So not everybody thinking about the project or the problem the exact same way. Also taking into account that this takes time, that increasing diversity within an existing team, or if you're creating a new team, that it does take time, it does take thought, and it does take effort to do this well. So don't just think this is a quick add-on. It is something that needs to really be well thought out from the beginning. And that's part of what this concept note will really allow your team to do, is to consider how this will happen. Also, you really want to be thinking about empowering underrepresented groups, not tokenizing them, not just adding them as an extra because you have to have that diversity, but how are you then going to empower people to be successful in the research and to take an important role in that research. And then again, thinking about that overarching concept of intersectionality and how that might influence the power dynamics in your research team, and really being careful not to reproduce marginalization. And that might even be in terms of how resources flow in your project, the budget, the finances, who, you know, which researchers might get larger amounts of a budget, or which communities might be more represented or less represented in the research. And then finally, we have found that trying to really decentralize knowledge claims from not only being within academia, so moving out of this ivory tower model and thinking about a science that is much more inclusive and open, is also very helpful, because sometimes the academic process of research or academic training itself may actually inhibit some of this openness or some of this diversity. So these are some recommendations. And now I'm going to, actually we have a quick Zoom poll here in English, and then you'll see it in Spanish pop up, but use that to help you. So please pick a choice, and then I'll pass the word to Gabriela, who will speak a little bit about a communication tool within teams. Okay. All right, I think we are beginning to see that all of the answers are correct, which means that all of the above, but if you selected any of the answers, then these are all true. So keep that in mind. With that, Gabriela, if you like to speak about the colaboratorios.
Sí, gracias, Lili. Hola a todos, ánimo.
Thank you, Lily. It's great to see you again. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lourdes and Anna, for interpreting today. And also Anna and Haley for their support, you know, in the backstage preparation of the workshop. Lily has said many important things, and I'd also like to comment on Nicole's presentation. She talked about strategies that must be significant when it comes to knowledge co-production and participation in research. I think this is one of the aspects that we have been addressing throughout the course. You have mentioned this work, you know, participatory approaches. So this is connected to strategies you already apply, you know, actual participation, learning models, etc. So it's the same thing when we talk about integrating all this, especially when it comes to knowledge co-production from an EDI perspective. This is a specific example of our work. As Lily have said, this example is based on our experience, but also it is based on research. We have studied the social media, we have studied how different stakeholders, how different TD stakeholders interact. So we have created this community of practice collaboratorios. Do you remember Pennington's article? You know, these communities of practice collaboratories. Pennington talks about this community learning, and he talks about this approach. There is this social learning approach, and that is a theoretical basis. There are two ways of viewing learning. First of all, individual learning, you know, psychologically, biologically, and this contrasts with social learning, where we assume that learning is built collectively. So these communities of practice collaboratories are based on this approach. They specifically address collaboration models based on learning communities. I think you know this model already. And also response communities. I think Rayana's question is very interesting. She says that there are many stakeholders that are not very close to science. How do we get them closer to science? Okay, maybe when we think about science, when we think about knowledge and teams and the kind of knowledge and the type of knowledge production protocols that are validated and relevant to our project, I think that should be the question. And this really, illustrates what Lily was saying about decentralizing in the academic world, and providing new knowledge protocols. As Nicole has said, there is this learning process, which is an iterative process. It changes, it evolves. Some people talk about loop learning. Others talk about talking to the team. Next one, please. And here we have the example of our work. This is the model on the right. We put together the practice communities for this project. Another interesting strategy is called regressive planning. This is used in education, in planning for primary schools or elementary schools, and in high school as well. And the idea is to have backward planning. So you start from the logical model we introduced last session. You set yourself your aims. And then you have, ethical decisions, funding, team organization, etc. Therefore, you develop a collaborative work model. As you remember from the case we have mentioned many times, and this is the project we are now implementing with the IAI. There are 4 countries. Each country had a leading team formed by researchers, people from the community, and graduate students.
And here you can see the structure of our work to start backwards from our objectives to our teamwork. With constant communication, I think it's important, as Lily was saying, to think of this not just as a token, but diversity as a constant exercise that runs parallel with whatever research you're conducting. So we have different descriptions of our work meetings with our whole team, meetings by country. Next slide, please. Something that was very interesting is that our practice community actions, they changed from what we had planned at the beginning. So at a certain point during the process, one of those practices was focused on creative writing in communities, because one of the results we wanted to have was a book that not just to capture not just academic discourse, but different narratives in prose and in verse, and they asked for us for that. So that collaboration focused on that, on creating that book as a deliverable for our group, and hopefully we will soon be able to share the link with you because it's being edited right now. I think that was the last slide, Lily, wasn't it? Yes. We have another Zoom vote quote.
In the Zoom poll. Here. Choose up to 2 options.
Si yo envío, Lili y yo enviamos información sobre planeación regresiva.
Lily and I will send you, yes, information of regressive planning.
Okay, I think we've had a moment for the poll. So here we see actually very interesting that the responses with the most where people feel ready to integrate into the research design, more equitable and inclusive research engagement. That's excellent. As well as co-production of knowledge with policymakers and engaging local communities. So we look forward to seeing those as well as the other choices in the concept notes. Okay, we're coming into our last kind of 10 minutes before the question. So unfortunately today, Marcia Lee was unable to join us, but wanted to talk just a little bit about finishing up the case of Jawik, Jamaican women in coffee. And here we see, interestingly, many of the kind of theories and tenets and ideas of transdisciplinary research through this case study. And so importantly, what we see here is how they've worked to create a shared vision and to build or generate kind of trust. And this was really important in terms of the community engagement piece of this research, of having kind of multiple engagements with communities, not only just going to a community once and kind of extracting information from that community, but actually returning to the community to share results, to share kind of what they learned through the survey, to share best practices learned through the research, and to really co-produce this shared vision and this shared research. And so this also really helped to establish clear objectives for trainings that were delivered both to this community and other similar communities of coffee producers, and to ensure that kind of those materials were designed in collaboration with communities. You can see how they've explicitly included their farmers. So those who they're doing kind of research about, but also research with, importantly here, in actually developing training material and kind of encourage this active participation kind of throughout the case study. And so thinking about how that community engagement can be really deep, and bringing, communities into also, co-develop materials or evaluate materials for feedback, so that they can be as well designed for the community as possible. And also something I want to speak to on this slide is really how important this is in terms of monitoring and evaluation. So kind of the last column over here, but a lot of the tools, including going back a few weeks to talking about the results chain, that logic model of backwards planning, as Gabriella was just speaking about kind of the backwards planning in the collaboratories of practice, the CPC model, but thinking at the beginning about how monitoring and evaluation of your project, of your research is going to happen throughout the process, and building in the monitoring and the project evaluation from the beginning. So this isn't something that's just kind of checked off at the end. And as you're designing your concept notes, be kind of thinking about how is that monitoring and evaluation going to happen? And then also, how is the dissemination of the results going to happen as well? And this can also be a place thinking about equity and inclusion and diversity to actually build a leadership capacity and mentorship of within communities or of members of your own research team, so that you're seeing kind of this mentorship and this development happen as well as part of a research project. So you can see the kind of multi-beneficial ways that actually taking equity, diversity, and inclusion seriously can improve your science and improve your project and improve the outcomes, and especially around knowledge mobilization. Thinking about how different voices may be able to impact communities and speak to communities. And Marshall also briefly wanted to speak a little bit to some of the ways that in the Jawick case, conflict was managed. And if you remember, we talked about conflict as something that is going to happen in most teams. And that conflict does not have to be destructive. It can become destructive if it's not managed, if it's just kind of ignored, or people do not feel seen or heard or included. But conflict can also be very productive and can strengthen a team if they can move through it in a positive way. And so some of the conflicts that were identified and managed in the project life cycle for the Jawick case study in Jamaica was the conflict that they were seeing were between farming communities, between agriculture workers, so the farmers themselves, and between the farmers and the regulatory authorities. And some of the ways that they managed conflict was actually to segregate the trainings by community. So thinking about, should trainings happen among everybody? Should they happen separately? Who should be engaged there? Encouraging group work and discussion. And this can be really important because actually allowing people to hear how problems are framed or solutions are framed, which might be different, to be able to talk through these conflicting areas can be very helpful, as well as building trust. So learning together can be a very important way to build trust. Having meetings together where people can share openly, can get to know each other, and can build friendships or relationships also helps with that trust building. And when you get a conflict that arises, if you have that trust amongst team members, that can really help for navigating the conflict in a positive way, because people are willing to say, that might not be my view, but I trust this person and I'm willing to try to see the problem through their eyes and see if we can come together in a useful way. And finally, thinking about, in this case, how to select kind of trainers or how to select members of the team to engage who are familiar either with the community or with the local context or with the problem, as other ways to kind of manage conflict, in this case, more around community engagement. And for the sake of questions, we're going to encourage you to watch the kind of last 10 minutes of Martine's video, but today we'd like to give the full 15 minutes to questions. So you can access the PowerPoints with the video link on the website. And that talks, the second part of the video talks about a case study in New Zealand working with the Maori community and overcoming some research issues and how to kind of move forward the best with that. So we encourage you to watch that 10 minutes after this session. And finally, just our contact information here as well. We encourage you to stay in contact. We're on Twitter. You can follow our research team, TD Research Lab, Jawick, Marshallese organization, or some of us who are there personally. We're also have a website, with presence on Facebook and Instagram. And so we look forward to continuing our kind of sustained engagement. And thank you so much for your time through these 7 weeks. So at this point, I think we can turn over to Q&A with Nicole as well.
Thank you so much, Lily and Gabriela. That was an amazing presentation, also with, as in all other sessions that has been provided by you, many insights on how to move forward and how to apply to the approach in practice. So I'm going to bring up some questions to both of you and also to Nicole. And I'll seek to make the questions that are most comprehensive and that were not addressed in the chat somehow, reasserting that we can provide some insights in writing after the session today. So to Nicole, I'd like to bring together some questions that were related to the topics that the Belmont Forum Collaborative Research Actions address, especially in terms of what's upcoming for next year. So 3 of our attendees today made questions related to the topics that are covered in the calls and what they should expect.
Do you want me to tackle it now? Yes. Okay. Just
yes,
sure.
and then I'll pass on to the other group, and we can try to make 2 questions each if we have the time, or 1 question each if we can. If we don't.
Perfect. All right. So you guys have got me at a fortuitous moment because the Belmont Forum Plenary was last week. So all of my members agreed to what's coming up in 2023. So in 2023, as may have already been hinted at or strongly suggested, or maybe even made very blunt, we will have Climate, Environment, and Health 2 as a call for proposals that is ready to go. So we do have that one. There's still discussions on the timelines for that, but that one is now ready, has been agreed, is ready for launch. We have a second call on urban blue and green spaces. So this is really examining the parks, the water ways, all those green and blue spaces within communities and how they can be used to with and by the communities in mitigating climate challenges, in improving health. So it's actually quite a broad call in that context. There's lots of opportunities for engagement, but it's really looking at the benefits of those blue and green spaces in our communities. And then the third call, exactly, thank you, Lila. And then the third call that has been agreed to take forward is on climate and cultural heritage. So this is looking at a bunch of different intersections on climate and cultural heritage, mostly the impact of climate on cultural heritage, but that can be cultural heritage in the perspective, from the perspective of like UNESCO heritage sites, for one example, but it can also be cultural heritage in a more sort of like the way the community has to adapt because their traditional ways of working or engaging with the land around them is changing. So it's again, we try to scope these calls so that multiple partners can see themselves reflected in them, and we can get the most hopefully awesome projects out of them as possible. I'm noticing that there's where can we find more information. They will become available as we have more clear information on the timelines and stuff. So we will be making that available to people. We're also always continuing to look for funders who might be interested in funding, because as you might have guessed from the presentation, the people who participate in the calls, the researchers who are eligible for funding, basically depends entirely on which funders choose to fund any given call. And those funders can be Belmont Forum members, but often they won't fund all the calls in 1 year. They can also be partners. You don't need to be a Belmont Forum member to come in and fund a specific call. So if there's a funding institution that says, oh my goodness, climate and cultural heritage is super important to us, we actually have money that we would like to put towards this, they can come and join the call, the same as the members. They just don't get to, they just have to provide us an annex. What are the rules of engagement with your funding institution? So that's the beauty of the Belmont Forum system, is that we try to make it as inclusive and welcoming as possible for all possible funders to get the most international projects possible and to fund the most researchers possible. So that's this year. They're still in development very quickly. We're working on an Africa regional call. We are working on a call that so towards the development, these are not calls that will happen next year, of Amazon and tropical forests, which is particularly potentially of value to this group. We're looking at a call on pathways to sustainability, which will examine the intersection of the sustainable development goals. We are looking at a call on, did I say Africa regional? I might have already said that one. Sorry. And we had just had agreement to take forward sustainability and peace building, or environmental peace building, and one that is going to be multiple calls on urban, defining urban transitions. So that one will be a longer term piece. But these ones I just mentioned are 2024 and further. So we're still in the defining the questions, working with the community to identify what the challenges are, so that it's quite early in the space. But as you were asking, where are we going? What does that look like? That's about what that looks like right now.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So to Lily and Gabriela, I'll try to do the same and address to you the questions that are most recurrent. I've seen that Gabriela also have already responded somehow some of these questions, but would you care to comment live a little bit further on the instruments to address the necessity of inclusion? So many questions go around the tools that you have used to actually make an environment where participation is not just something that's in the project, but something that actually involves and engages the local communities that you have worked with or that you're planning to work with.
Do you want to start, Gabby, and then I can?
Yes, Lily. Creo que algo que es interesante en todas las preguntas.
Well, I think something that's interesting about all questions is that we're having a deeper conversation about what it means to generate knowledge. Something that is interesting is like when we go to a workshop, and the workshop is about how to integrate people of African descent. And we think we're going to learn how to integrate people of African descent, but it's actually an ongoing conversation. And so it brings me hope how we understand knowledge generation protocols is something that is changing right now. Science is not the only knowledge generation protocol that informs. There are different sources to address the complex issues that we have right now. So when you have that perspective, that mindset, that the knowledge protocol is diverse, then the question on how can you make sure to make that integration process work, that goes into the background, because I believe that the knowledge that I can generate in the academia isn't the only one, and it's limited.
Therefore, working with the communities, local community, public policy sectors, people from the funding agencies, etc. And if I do this, I have a more open perspective, you know, someone has to help me do that. And I think that might be part of the answer as well. And also, thank you for your for many comments. I know many of you are already doing this work, but maybe now there is, you know, this space that that legitimates this, you know, as Roberto is saying, now we validate ancestral knowledge, and these people have always known how to do things, but now we are, you know, connecting the money, the funds to get results, and also this project. Now we are finding this connection, and that's part of the answer as well, Laila. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Gabriela. Lily, please go ahead.
One of the things that I would kind of say to them, it's maybe hard to say exactly a tool, but in the community kind of engagement, to the extent possible, where your team can, it might be through surveys or through focus groups, but where you're or participant observation even, but to the extent possible where your team can understand the local context, as well as how the people present are understanding the problem and the types of either knowledge or solutions that they, you know, want to get. So in Jawwick's case, they've been very successful with surveys of their communities and understanding in that way how contexts might differ amongst communities, even facing similar problems around coffee production and climate change and environmental change. In other cases, as we saw in Colombia, it was actually facilitating workshops with local people where they were given kind of very simple templates, but asked them, what is the problem from your view, and what kinds of knowledge do you need? What kinds of solutions are you looking for? And your team may not be able to provide every solution for every community, but it will help to make your research and especially the impact of your research so much kind of more impactful if you actually really understand the problem from the perspective of the communities and what they are looking for in that knowledge. And so it is definitely a balance between some of the more scientific research kind of ways, modeling or other kinds of data that you might be utilizing. But if you're not thinking about the local context or not thinking about the needs of people who are present, the solutions that you come up with in just the research might actually not really have any impact because communities may not be open to those types of solutions. And then you find you do research, but it doesn't have that transformative impact.
Thank you so much, Lily. So to wrap up here, I'd like to seek to translate a little bit the last question made by Diana to a question that I could address to the three of you, because I think you have a great amount of experience in trying to deal with those types of challenges that she puts to the table here. She says, from my experience in transdisciplinary research, I think that one of the biggest challenges is the undervalorization of the ancestral or heritage knowledge. And then according to academia, they look at that knowledge as something that hasn't enough scientific embasement. It's not evidence. It's not understood as evidence. So to take on her challenge and to seek to address on 1 or 2 minutes each of you, how, in your experience, was this process of trying to incorporate local knowledges in scientific research? In what was the translation process like to the Belmont Forum, to both you, Lily, and Gabriela, as researchers that are really well experienced in applying it to the approach? What are the main challenges of this translation, and how did you try to overcome them? I know that this question is not answerable in 1 or 2 minutes, but I'd like to hear your main insights on this question. Nicole, if you would care to start, please.
I was going to say, I think it's easier for me to start because I have less very specific examples, but more sort of where we try to lead the community, because you're absolutely right. This is a huge challenge. And it's about a culture change too. It's about a culture change within the academic ivory tower. It's about recognizing that your way of thinking and your way of doing are not always the only ways, and recognizing that there are many different ways of knowing. And so this is something that is part of the ongoing Belmont Forum dialogue. And so there are very specific individual projects. So there's quite a number of Belmont Forum projects where this has been done well. I'm sure there are also, if I looked for them, examples of where this is done less well. But the idea in the context, sort of at the 1,000-foot level that I look at, is really to make sure that in the conversations that we have, in the trainings that we have, in the way that we support the community, it's to maintain the line and to remind people that the important part is to be inclusive, to recognize that your way of knowing is not the only way of knowing, but it's reinforcing that message, because it doesn't matter if you're an early career scientist, a mid-career scientist, or a late career scientist. Everybody needs to remember to respect one another, to respect the information and the knowledge that is being shared with them, and to recognize that all of these pieces have value. So it's not a perfect system by a long shot, and we've got a ways to go. But as long as we continue, working with the communities, particularly the research communities, to understand and recognize the value of different ways of knowing, we're getting there, slowly but surely. But I'm going to move it on to the other experts, who are probably more experts than me, Gabriela and Lily, who have probably more on the ground experience.
Thank you, Nicole. Please, Gabriela.
Sí, yo creo que o sea, hay como varios niveles, y uno
I think
es...
there are several levels, and there is the individual level. For instance, if I'm doing something, I need to be sure of it. And we talked about transdisciplinarity as a way of life, and that is much more personal. I have found it very useful to read different thinkers that think about what it means to be brown, or the history of colonization in Latin America. What is the tension between my indigenous side and my Spanish side, and living that tension. And that also helps me effect a change. As Nicole was saying, now we are recognizing the value of different types of knowledge and their protocols. And also, Lily and myself, since the moment we met, we've had a brave ideological conversation. When you work in a team, you need to have this conversation. Who are you? Where are you going to, ideologically and politically? And that's also important. And it also shows, when you do a truly TD work. Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. Lily, please.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is that I do feel optimistic, I guess, just to close this out in the last minute, is I feel optimistic that there's a change happening around the valorization or the valuing of local and indigenous knowledge. And I feel like that change has been very strong over the last decade, but especially in the last few years, where I do think the scientific community is beginning to really shift in how these types of knowledges are valued, and also in seeing the integration of these types of knowledges as very important, and even in some cases mandatory. So now I've actually begun to see, and maybe this is more in the context of North America and the United States and Canada, that projects that do not incorporate local or ancestral or indigenous values or ways of knowing are actually now often critiqued. And so this shift, I think, is actually very positive in that more and more review committees, and I know there's a lot of places where this needs to change, but I've been seeing on grants that I sit on, grant committees, that either people from a local community or an indigenous group actually sit on these review committees and look for this type of knowledge, or that it is a part of a rubric now. And so if it's missing, that actually now is a detriment. So I would just say that we are seeing a shift in this happening. And I see that as one positive kind of optimistic piece. So.
That's amazing, Lily. Thank you so much. To respect everyone's time, I'd like to close this amazing session we have to have a really huge thank you to our presenters here and our transdisciplinary team that led us through these 5 incredible sessions. And I'd like just to highlight to everyone, if you have any doubts about the evaluation criteria on the concept note, please approach your facilitators, and also any other kinds of suggestions, evaluations about the process of the course. We are open to hear what you all thought about our course. And see you all on our last session next Thursday. Thank you so much, everyone.